Welcome to Women Writing Memoir. I'm Brooke Warner with Linda Joy Myers. Hi, Linda Joy.
Great. We're glad to be here with all of you. And we have a lot to get through, so let's roll them.
All right. So, writing while female, this is where we're starting today's conversation. And we have three parts to our presentation, which is really more of a conversation and the ideas that we've been talking through. So, Linda Joy, we teach memoir, and 95% of our students usually are women memoirists. And so I thought we'd kick off by saying, what do we even mean when we say writing while female? What are some of the issues unique to women memoirists?
Right. And, these are some that I certainly really did struggle with myself. But, the whole idea of writing truth and writing our truth when we live in a woman's body is kind of an intense way to put it. But, we are not just a brain, we have a body, and mind, body, spirit, as we're saying here. And there are many experiences and many perceptions, subtle and overt, that we go through when we're living, and we're trying to also figure out our story, whether we're trying to write it or just living it and then figuring out what to write. So, we as women, we are in the world in a certain way.
Absolutely. And I would argue too, the cultural conditioning that happens, we are born into women's bodies, but then of course we live our lives as women and we have women's experiences. And a lot of the experiences that many of us share are those of people pretty early on telling us to stay small, telling us the things that we shouldn't say, not to take up space. So much of the memoirists that we work with, the things that they tell us have to do with all the ways in which they've been curbed or the roles that they've been expected to take on in their lives, right? Lots of times just caretaking or, being quiet or not doing this, and so I think a lot of times what happens is we grow up and we're in constant anticipation of how we should behave. And of course, when we come to write our memoirs, all of that stuff it's cellular, right?
It's in your unconscious. I mean, if you learn and practice being quiet since you were, as long as you can remember, or not trying to control your thoughts. And then this whole thing about, I love this last point, the inner world, unique and wonderful, sometimes scary and messy. And God forbid if you're scary and messy. I mean, we can scare ourselves, but maybe our story will scare other people, or there's a lot of things we can think about that we'll lose if we even start writing. I certainly went through that. But yeah, let's look at these boxes. Oh boy.
Yeah, these are the boxes we came up with, and this is where we would hope that you would put some information into the chat window, because these are just some of the boxes.
What are your boxes?
Yeah, what are your boxes? We put down here, be ready to be critiqued if you dare to have desires, show that you want more in life than to be a wife or a mother. You live in a big body, a disabled body, you want to have your own life, you are messy. We put down here more, maybe you're already living this way. You're a bitch because you speak your mind. You're gay or trans or non-binary. You're a person of color. You have a mental health diagnosis. You come from lower status, less education, poverty, abuse. I mean, you see that the boxes we're supposed to check is actually like very few of us. And for those who can check all the boxes, I would say that probably they're hiding some of this other stuff that is here. And so we get so confined into like the constrained space in which we are supposed to present our lives. And thank you all for the amazing things that you're adding here.
Yes, wonderful things about, quietness or being a mistake or, being sensitive.
Too sensitive. That's a huge one.
Shame and all these things. We're going to get into shame here in just a couple minutes. And this whole idea of, the more you try to fit yourself into the box, the more stuff hangs out, or you feel bad about yourself. You internalize judgments, and then it makes you more susceptible both for silencing yourself and being judged and making yourself even smaller because people are judging you. Let's look at the next slide.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this whole thing on silencing, I mean, been a therapist for over 40 years, and also along during that time, and of course see people having been silenced a great deal in that role, and then started teaching memoir classes in my therapy office about 25 years ago. And it was pretty interesting. A lot of the people I first started talking to, working with, were therapists who'd been through therapy and worked on stuff and all that. And many of them would cry and just go, "Oh my God, I can't believe I just wrote that story. I thought I knew it, but I didn't really know it this way." And it was the first time they'd both written something and watched themselves write it and participated in looking at themselves in a new way. And of course, therapists are told to be quiet and be silenced. And so when I first started writing, I didn't, I left a lot out. And my writing coaches said, "Well, what do you think about that? And, why didn't you put that in?" And I'm like, "You mean I can have an opinion?" And I'm older than Brooke. I was actually raised and slapped and, kind of abused about talking and about saying things. And so I internalized that too. And I'm not the only one in the world that that's happened to. So this whole silencing thing to me seems like such a big topic for me, yes, but for so many people we work with, right, Brooke?
Yeah, it's huge. And we're going to kind of slide through just four of the biggest issues that we encounter, or the ones that we felt were pertinent to today. But by all means, this is not comprehensive. So please let us know what you're thinking about as well, and we can bring it up as we go. But yes, I mean, silencing is also a massive hurdle to overcome. It's just very difficult if you've been silenced to then come to the page and think that it's going to be easy in any way to share all of your deepest secrets, right? The other one that we have here is judgment. This is you will be judged if you put your truth onto the page, no matter what, because women's experiences, if it's something that you feel you did, anything like benign, I mean, being an ambivalent mother, having an abortion, having, even sometimes having sex before marriage, for God's sake, whatever sins you committed, right? That female sins are pretty much, if you're not falling into those boxes, then you are wrong. And this is the judgment that comes down. And this is also why this was part of actually the inspiration, Linda Joy, because we did feel that there was judgment around, you can't do that, you're angry, you're raging, whatever it is. And this is happening all the time with women and memoir, which is that you put something on the page and other people are judging you for having lived your life,
Live that life. Yeah,
yeah,
they're critiquing the life instead
right.
of the work. And we hear that a lot when we're reading reviews and reading authors who've been reviewed. And often, too often, they say, "Well, it was my life that was judged." And sometimes women run into it in writing groups too. It's like, "Well, you shouldn't, if you hadn't done that, then that wouldn't have happened to you." Oh dear, you know.
Well, and we judge ourselves. That's the other thing that's so hard about this, is that you're coming in onto the page and you're writing about the things that you already are carrying self-judgment about. And then you're trying to articulate that into some way. And then it's there, maybe there is reason to judge what is there, but it's also a process of trying to explain the circumstances. So often we're talking about the context and the circumstances of a life. None of us is perfect. All of us are flawed. Every single one of us is going to make mistakes. And so trying to sidestep that or write it in a way that makes you sound better, of course, is also not authentic. and it doesn't particularly help your reader. So judgment is inherent in the process of writing memoir, and it will be leveled at you by you, and it will be leveled by you by others.
Yes.
So partly it's just to say this exists, and maybe more toward us as women, certainly than the men are getting, I would argue.
Oh, well, we could really get into that, but let's talk about shame. um, yeah, shame is, well, it's often endemic in, in our judgments about ourselves. And like Brooke said, maybe there are things we regret. There are things we wish we had done differently, and that's often true. But, there's this sort of inherent shame in many cultures and even religions, in part at least, suggest or overt about it, that because you are a woman, you should be ashamed. There are things to be ashamed of, and the lesser sex and the weaker sex and all these things, and these get internalized. There's the cultural layer, and then there's the um, the way that we carry shame, even if someone abused us. They were wrong in doing that, but we carry the shame of it. And this is very difficult. We see this in our classes. People are trying to write about this, and but then their own judgments. It's a circle. The judgments, the shame, the silencing, rinse and repeat. It goes around and around. And so much needs to be done to help ourselves put words around our true story, which we're going to get into, yeah, in this conversation.
Absolutely. And the double standards, which you are all mentioning, because that's really what we're talking about. And the double standards are profound. I mean, I just pulled up my book, Right on Sisters, because I wrote a whole section on double standards. And I just wanted to mention a few of them because I've given this a lot of thought, because I've seen this, of course, as many of you have, but I've seen it pretty intimately in the publishing world. So just to name a few of them, women writers have their lives reviewed while male writers get to have their books reviewed.
Mhm.
Women memoirists are diarists while male memoirists are brave.
Oh, wow.
um, women write nuanced, believable male characters while male writers don't have to extend the same courtesy to their female characters. So I think that these are important to look at, and there are many more. The reason being, because if you can identify the double standard, you can also start to call bullshit. I mean, I think that is one of the reasons that I wrote this book, is to say, I just went running with a friend recently who I really admire and who knows a lot about the book industry. And she's like, well, women are being published more than men. So really, like, women are not really getting the short shrift in the publishing industry. And I just started talking to her about it. Like, it's much more nuanced than that. We are being published, absolutely. But the corners that we're being pushed into and the ways in which our voices are being silenced is still absolutely the case. We're being told you have to write in these categories. Women are overwhelmingly dominating memoir and romance and certain kinds of genre fiction, but we're not dominating a lot of the more kind of serious topics. And then along comes someone like Gina Frangello, who writes this really brave, serious memoir, and she gets eviscerated. And I think that this is kind of what we're trying to say too, is like, our lives and the whole of our lives should be celebrated in the same way that men's stories are celebrated. And when men write these big epic memoirs, people are just go crazy for it.
I mean, there's this whole thing about if women write about housework and changing diapers, we're like boring. But these men who are remaining unnamed at the moment, but we know who they are, can write about all that and, glorified. Like, wow, the man is writing about changing diapers. I almost threw up. Anyway, sorry, but
That is true. And I think it's important for us too. We're going to talk about this at the end, but how we talk about women's stories as well, because it's true. It's like the everyday lives of women are somehow being pushed down into the realm of domestic or,
yeah.
ordinary. And that has been the case for hundreds of years, and we're just playing this out in a similar way here with the way that we talk about memoir and the way that the culture talks about memoir. And so we want to try to, I don't know, wrap our hands around that and at least stop doing it, ourselves as we talk about the genre of memoir.
And this is perfect. That's what we're talking about, these outside forces, right?
Absolutely. And you mentioned writing programs. I mentioned publishing, critics, even potential critics, the culture. Here's all the things, we're already feeling all of these things ourselves. And then we go out into the world and people go, yep, you're right. You can't do that. You are angry. You are a bitch. You are terrible. Like it's really tough because you have to stay so strong in the face of the criticism that you're already leveling at yourself, because it's internalized. We believe all of these things to be true, and then we go out into the world and we hear more of the same, which is why it's just so hugely important that we have these spaces where we can honor each other. And this is what's so brave about women gathering together to have these conversations. So thank you all for being here.
And welcome to the men who are here also. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, we do have male allies that we invited, and thank you for listening. All right. Writing the hard truths. So now we're going to get into the nitty gritty a little bit here about how to do this stuff, which I think is a big deal. And, as we said, we only had 45 minutes. And so Linda Joy and I said, oh my gosh, this could be a series. There's so much to say. But here are the things that we chose to highlight today. So number one, big one, Linda Joy, writing about trauma.
Yeah, writing about trauma in my groups for many, many years. I was offering writing as healing groups, and people were coming there to write about their trauma, to write about ways they could find a new way to be with what happened to them, to heal it, and so on. And so, it was a space that I made, created as best I could to be a safe space. And Brooke and I do that in our teaching as well. But there are so many places in the world that where this can be an issue about, is this a safe place? And why am I doing this? And what we have found is that if you truly name and be honest and name your experiences and get it on the page as it happened, that can be traumatic. It can be freeing eventually. And I think you wanted to say more about that, didn't you, Brooke?
Well, I wanted to talk about the idea that trauma is not really a theme. People write trauma. It shows up, I would argue, in the vast majority of memoirs, and certainly the vast majority of women's memoirs. All kinds of stuff has happened to us as women, whether it's sexual abuse, domestic abuse, verbal abuse. Sometimes it's much more subtle, sometimes it's gaslighting. Whatever the thing is that you have experienced, it might have been drugs, it might have been, a mental illness. There's all kinds of stuff that is traumatic in our lives. The thing is that we're going to talk about the arc of this, of course, but I think really figuring out how to stay the protagonist of your own story. We're gonna actually, it's maybe a good segue into the victim piece here. Which, well, it's the second slide. I'll come back to omission. Let's talk about being a victim for just a second, because I think the trauma and the victimhood stuff is interconnected, Linda Joy. And I want you to unpack this a little bit for us. But I think what happens is that a lot of times these early drafts that people do really is about processing. This is what happened to me. I need to be seen. I need to figure this out. And then there's an evolution that starts to happen, as we say here, that is beyond the needing a witness and moving into thinking about what it is that you're bringing to the page for your own healing, but also for your reader.
Right. And so, but there's there's like stages of this thing, which which we need to talk about too. And that is, I mean, sometimes first you have to name your own experience. There are many people that I've run into that haven't yet
I'm putting it up because we're jumping all over the place, which is totally fine. We'll come back. We said it was going to be a free flow conversation, which is great. So we weren't sure.
It is.
Yeah. So let's talk about these stages because they're all interconnected.
Yeah, right. So that, you know, you need to write about it so you can identify your own life, your own place in your life, what you did do, so you can name the things. And it is the what happened to me draft. And you'll see a lot of people critique for writing about this is what happened to me. Well, that's one necessary stage in this kind of writing. And then you can, once you have stated it, see, when you put your stuff on the page, then you witness yourself. So then you now become the narrator who is looking at this character, yourself, and you see what she did on the page, in the story, in the scenes, and so on. And it creates a new relationship between yourself and the things that happen. Then you go to what do others need to see and learn from my story. You can only get there after you've done that early draft. And then you start to shape it. This needs a scene. Well, this needs more narration. And this is what Brooke and I are teaching all the time. And then you'll get to an editor or coach who is another positive witness supportive person who will help you really look at where are the craft elements? How can you really hit the heart of other people who are going to read this and have them be moved and affected and changed and witnessed by your story that you wrote?
Yeah, and I'd like to go back because I think, as we said here, we've got a lot going on. Let me go back to omission here. But, there's this question of omission. On the one hand, you have protecting yourself and others, but there's also the third point here that says gauging what to include in a final draft will get clearer over time. I think that this is an important question because I know a lot of people who omit out of fear, who omit out of it's dangerous. What are people going to say? Just yesterday I was talking to a memoirist who said, I have a busy social life and a lot of friends, and I'm worried about how this is going to impact me and my girlfriend. What will people think? We'll be ostracized. So these are really tough and personal questions. It's like your real life is intersecting with what you're trying to put on the page, and it can take a long time to grapple with what you want to share, versus what you feel you can share. And then we have so many examples of our authors, actually, and Linda Joy herself, who ended up not including things and then later wishing they had, or also including things that they thought were going to just be absolutely devastating to them. And then it turned out that no one really cared, that they made a mountain out of a molehill, right? So there's that as well.
Yeah. People are asking about this victim thing. So let's go to that slide because it's one before this. Yeah, because I have a couple things to say, and some people are bringing this up. So somebody is saying, which you and I talked about as we were formulating these slides about a victim. And so a lot of people and women are slammed, mostly women, I think, are slammed for writing about situations in which they were a victim and trying to make sense of what happened to them, as if you shouldn't, as if it's really bad to be a victim. This happened to me too when I was writing Don't Call Me Mother, and I was told, you need to not sound like you're whining. Well, I agree. You need to not sound like you're whining, but how do you write down what actually happened when you are mistreated by people? And then the other point that I always make is if you were abused as a child, or ever abused, but also abused as a child, you are a victim. I mean, there isn't any other way to talk about that. But the culture really, really gets on our case for putting that on the page. I mean, I was certainly ostracized by my own extended family for writing my true story about mental illness in our family and about a mother-child abandonment. And I never got to talk to them again, So the price I was afraid I would pay, I did pay. But by then, 15 years into writing my memoir, I'd come to terms with this is my story.
Yeah, and I wanted to piggyback on that and talk about Know My Name, the Chanel Miller
Yeah,
book, which
good.
I hope that many of you have read, and if not, it certainly needs to go on your list, because there is also, I mean, you mentioned, of course, child abuse, but being a victim of rape by a stranger is also something that you
Yeah.
can't control. You know, that is something that happened to Chanel. She wrote about it beautifully. And I think it's important that you ask yourself these questions. What do you want the reader to know about your traumatic experience? I think what happens a lot of times in early drafts of memoir is that people are really processing what happened to them and are not shaping it into a story yet. You know, and the other thing that I really loved about what Chanel Miller did is that she names, yes, I am a victim. You know, I am a victim of this crime that happened to me. But and she sort of claims that, but she also says, you know, why do we look at victims in this way? You know, why do we look at victims as if it is, you know, she talks about like how she got blamed basically. Well, you were drinking too much that night, you were wearing a short skirt, you, why were you, you know, outside after 2 a.m. You know, all of these things that would never get leveled at boys in college, right? And so I think what she does that I think is really brilliant is she forces the reader to look at the way that she was treated after the fact. And so I also want everybody who's writing about trauma to sort of list the things that they are trying to bring to light, because I think one of the best ways to write about being a victim and to write about trauma is to say, why do we treat victims this way? And I was one of them. And then there's this dispassionate way that you're entering into a discourse about the nature of victimhood in our culture. So that's kind of the main takeaway I hope that people will consider as you're thinking about writing about being a victim. And certainly if anyone tells you don't be a victim, that is ridiculous. You know, to Linda Joy's point, it was not your fault that you were the victim. And so lots of memoirs, of course, center on this idea. So let's look at resilience, Linda Joy, to end this section.
Mhm.
That's really what we're writing toward. You know,
Well, the resilience is the more, what I've discovered is the more that I wrote the truth, the stronger I felt, and having words shape an experience is in itself an experience of empowerment. And then your readers will also, how many times have you all read a book and you're like, oh, yeah, that's what happened to me, even though it's a different story. And we, as readers, identify with the protagonist and what did the protagonist go through? We empathize, we go through the journey with them. And then we find out, well, how did they resolve this or go through it and live through it, or all these things that we're looking for as readers. And so we keep those in mind in the later stages, middle and later stages of formulating the story that we'll put out in the world, that help other people.
yeah, and resilience, I mean, certainly with women's stories, it's central. You know, sometimes people are like, well, my book is about resilience, and I'm like, almost always it is, because there's some kernel of survival. You know, we all survived our lives, and again, these can be small and big things, and there's, you know, lots of times these traumas are things that do take a back seat, you know, and sometimes they're also about claiming truth. You know, for people who are writing books about, you know, coming out or coming into some other kind of truth, it's another kind of trauma, because you're saying, I'm claiming this as mine and other people are up against me on this. You know, so you have to, you know, conjure up so much resilience to live that life. So I think so many women's memoirs are about resilience. And so if, you know, as you're writing the trauma and as you're writing the victim stuff, it's just thinking to yourself, okay, well, what is my resilience journey? And I think that that can just simply help you around, you know, holding tight to some of the through threads and the takeaways that your readers are looking
The
for.
arc of your story.
The arc, exactly. All right, so let's look at our final section here, which is writing from your power. And this is the big one. This is the one that we hope that, the reason I think we wanted to do this memoir, or this this memoir, this webinar today, Linda Joy, is to just encourage everybody that this is very real what we're talking about today, and it actually takes resilience just to keep writing your true words.
Yeah, right. So, you know, and I love this picture of Daphne turning into a tree, and so we have to cope with being a woman in this woman's body, and what we are and who we are, and what do we need to do to protect ourselves, but we're also needing to be vulnerable at the same time. And there's this arc that I also experience from I can't say this, I can't even put this on the page to, but I do have something to say. I do. And we see this in classes too, I have something to say to the world, which can take a little while. Brooke, sometimes people come into our classes and they go, well, I'm just writing this for me. I just need to get this down. And then they're, with other people struggling with their story also and looking at writing and writing and writing. They do a lot of writing in all the different courses that we've done. And the more that they're writing, and a lot of times they'll say to you or me, oh, well, maybe do you think someone would want to read this? Have I said something helpful or useful? And we're like, yes, you need to develop it. But there it is. So
Well, I was going to say too, there's a release of shame that happens as well in these classes, or however you're sharing your work, which is that initially it feels very shameful. Sometimes that shame has been quite literally foisted upon you, whether it was by a perpetrator or by a family member saying, don't you ever share that. We don't share the family story. Don't air your dirty laundry, or you're a good girl, so how could you write about having sex? How could you write about, whatever the thing is that is so shameful? And so we're carrying all of this around in our bodies. And then we come to reveal these things on the page. And initially it feels terrifying, right? But little by little, the more you share, the more you write, the more you expose yourself, it has this very surprising effect, which is that it does start to release the shame. And I do think that's true. I mean, for people who write a lot of memoirs, I mean, it's not that it necessarily gets easier. I remember when I interviewed Mary Carr, and I just thought to myself, oh, she must be such a pro, and I said, how does it feel, once you're done with a memoir and it goes out into the world? And she just is like, I just feel so ashamed. I just feel terrible and ashamed. And I was not expecting that answer from her.
yeah,
So
great to have a refreshing, true answer, from Mary Carr, who puts so much out there, and including you. And the slide talks about the shadow sides, and getting that on the page. And for many years, I've been part of poetry therapy, bibliotherapy, and other uh, expressive therapies. And the expressive therapy world, it's all about, it could be dance, it can be writing, but it's expression that's in the body, back to this whole idea of being in a woman's body, and so you express it, you get it out of you, and it will and does feel dangerous. It can feel like you're going to re-traumatize yourself even. And we do have some suggestions about that. Should we talk about that here, or do we do that somewhere else?
I think we might need to keep moving only
All right,
because we have three
I
more
know we could
slides
go on
left.
forever.
And yeah, I mean, there's so much to say, but it is, it's just important too to remember that one of the best things about putting your words out into the world is that you get mirrored back from other people. Me too. That is absolutely the case.
And that names an era right now.
Right. I mean, I think that's why the Me Too movement was so powerful and why that name so captured an appropriate experience, because all these women, mostly, yes, some men, were looking like, oh my God, look at this explosion of people confessing, finally being unsilenced and saying, this is what happened to me. And it gave so many other people courage to do the same. And so this is some of what this is, it's reminding yourself, I am not just what hurt me. You're discovering, and this stuff is really powerful, that it is okay to want more, to be as powerful as you actually are. I just think, we're not good at receiving from other people the power of like how amazing we are, right? If someone says to you, you are absolutely incredible, how many of you deflect that? How many of you say, oh, no, no, not really, this apologetic thing that women do. And it's like, to own this awesomeness that each and every one of you have, it's not easy. It's actually quite easier to do the thing the culture wants us to do, which is to stay small and to say, oh no, not really, I'm not that great, blah, blah, blah. And so I think the memoir experience also is a long-term experience of cultivating confidence.
Yeah. And to realize that we can be more and ask for more. As I was working on healing a million things in the 70s, that's one of the things that helped me keep going, is to read the literature of the women at that time, which included some memoir, but a lot of women's fiction, and really look at, the ways that the new world was being presented in these works. And I would say, dare I do more, be more, say more? And the culture around me said no, and shut up, and you can't. So, we're talking 40 years later, I've worked my way, into being able to do it. But it was step by step through words, through writing, journaling, and then writing and reading.
Yeah, and this slide, which we'll share with all of you, speaks to exactly that. We have more content than we have time for, but there's a legacy. There are, as Linda Joy said, there are women who've come before you. I think these books, like we're talking about Gina's book, Burn Your House Down, and Chanel's book, and we have a few other books that we want to share at the end here, but they also give great inspiration. That's what I thought when I read it. I just thought, oh my gosh, this will inspire countless other women to be as brave, to put the scary truths on the page. And there are so many women who have come before you who have done it, so as you're asking yourself, can I do this? We just simply want to say, be brave and remember the women who have come before you. And all of this too, Linda Joy, as you're saying, sharing your truth gives others hope. This is a circle of women, and I think that it's like the more that we do, the more that it becomes commonplace, right?
Well, we're setting a new culture, in our work, as writers, as women memoirists, and even women writing fiction too, in different ways and in new ways. And the authenticity, put your authenticity on the page, claim your story, and in that first draft, write everything in there. That's your safe draft, even though it's scary. Put it all down, because you will create a new relationship with yourself and your shame and your silencing, and you will break through. And we've seen it so many times. I'm not just saying this. I mean, it happened to me. It happens to us in our classes over the 12 years. And in the 25 years I did these other workshops, it was like a miracle. I mean, it would always be like, wow, really? And look at that, and amazing. And the people doing the writing and the experimenting and the daring stuff were always like, I had no idea I could really do that. And so it's very exciting to be around when that happens.
And I think very few published memoirists, even the most celebrated memoirists, are strutting around feeling like they've arrived or that they're somehow awesome, right? I think that's another important thing to remember, is that that gut check that you're having, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to say this. I can't believe I'm going to share this. It requires you just to be brave over and over and over again. That's what I was saying about cultivating confidence. It's like, we work with so many different kinds of memoirists, and there's just not many I can think of off the top of my head who just say, wow, I'm so amazing. I'm so brave. I did this thing. You might feel that for a moment, and then you go right back to fear. And so it's a process. It's like, feel the fear, do it anyway, claim your story. And I think most importantly, what we're saying here is, like, don't feel like you have to check those boxes. A lot of you are already living outside the box. Awesome. The most interesting stories are the messiest stories. They are the ones where the authors took great risks to say, this is my truth. This is how I feel. And I think one of the reasons that Linda Joy and I were so inspired by Burn Your House Down was because I was reading it, and I said this in my Facebook post, my mind was on fire. My heart was buzzing. And I was just like, she is saying all of these things. Holy shit. And so if you can find that bravery within yourself, and maybe you won't publish it, maybe you can't, that's fine, but get it on the page, and that's the end here, where we're saying it's critical that you do, and bring it, bring your A game, bring your scary game.
Well, I
It's
want
gonna
to
be
I
okay.
want to say what her book did for me too. It's supposedly a book about rage. I kept going, where is it? Where is it? But the most wonderful thing about it, I thought, was I went, oh, I don't need to still be ashamed about certain things, even at my age, and even having written memoirs. I'm like, oh, and I felt that reading it helped free me. And here's this brave woman talking about her shame and her vulnerability and loss and sexuality and everything. And she's just saying, this is who I am. This is what I went through. And it was like, yeah. So, and it's not just about her book, but when you do read that, there is a key and a lock, something can unlock, and then when you're doing it, the same thing.
Yeah. And in addition to Gina's book, which is here in the upper left-hand corner, we included a bunch of other books, a bunch of other brave women's stories. Again, hardly comprehensive. These are some that we've read, that all of these books got pushback. All of these books were criticized, for being too, you name it, too much. How dare she? What is she thinking? Just the blowback from the culture, in any number of ways. And so we hope that you'll, take a look at these and add your own. By all means, the chat thread is going to be a wealth of information for us, and we'll make sure to get them out with the recording. But if you have other books that you feel like you want other people to know about, that blew you away, that took chances, that really did this thing that we're talking about, I do think, of course, it will give you great fortitude when you're feeling scared. When you say, can I do that? That's what these books do, because these women have already done it. They've put themselves out there and they survived. They're okay. Are they being judged? Hell yes. Are they judging themselves? Yeah. Are they having dark moments, of probably crawling into bed and crying all day if a critic says that their work is X, Y, and Z? You bet. But I think that the payoff is so incredible, because what we're saying is, this is the range of women's experiences. We are not just checking those perfect boxes.
No, we're not. We're blowing up the boxes. Word by word, sentence by sentence.